Today's webinar, yet another webinar from Help Systems. I think we've done probably about 300 of them this year, so it's amazing we're in December and looking at 2020 in our face here as we wrap up the end of the year, bringing you a very interesting topic that we've heard a lot about this year, IBM in the cloud. And really, it's a roundtable discussion that we're bringing to you today on the IBM I cloud topic, with some great experts from IBM, Skytap, and Meridian IT today. Obviously, there's other people that do this technology too, but we have this great group assembled for you to share their expertise. I'm Tom Huntington. I'm our Executive Vice President of Technical Solutions. This marks the 20th year of bringing webinars to you as customers. So really excited about that too. It's amazing how time has flown. Still loving what we do here at Help Systems. I'm an IBM Power champion, so some of these people that are with us today, I met through that program, Mr. Joe Cropper from IBM for sure, and Tom and Dan through their colleagues at Skytap and Meridian IT. So excited to be with you today. We'll get started here as we introduce the team that we have with us. Dan, let's have you talk a little bit about what you do for Skytap.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Jones from Skytap. Skytap is a cloud service available on both the IBM Cloud and Microsoft's Azure offering, and we're designed to run traditional applications. So Power Apps, all three OSs, IBM I, AIX, and Linux on Power, as well as older x86 workloads. Customers can bring those up into the IBM Cloud or Azure unchanged. So bring your own IP address range. Don't make any changes to those apps and keep them running. And then we'll talk about, there's a number of reasons why people will do that and the various use cases.
Awesome. So Dan, and Skytap's, you guys have worldwide offices, right?
Correct. So we have headquartered in Seattle, Washington, and then we have offices in Toronto and London.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan. Look forward to you to sharing your stories today about the IBM I in the cloud. And next, we turn our attention to Joe Cropper. Joe, how are you today, and what do you do for IBM?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Doing well. So I'm our lead architect for our Power Systems hybrid multi-cloud solution. So I'm actually organizationally in the development team. And have the exciting job of being able to work and sort of drive our development strategies with respect to a number of products. So things like, what we're doing around Openshift and Power VC, worked a lot on some of those products in the past, and really trying to make sure that all of these different cloud technologies, across our IBM I, AIX, and Linux on Power communities work well together. So I think that's what it's all about as we kind of look in this whole hybrid multi-cloud world, is making sure that things interconnect well. Again, work a lot on the technologies, but I also have the pleasure of spending probably half of my time working with customers and helping them sort of understand what the array of technology options are and how to help them get from where they're at today to where they want to go with their cloud strategy. So really glad to be here with everybody this morning and talk about cloud.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and thank you for being willing to share IBM's story and strategy today around cloud and IBM I. Tom Harand, welcome to the webinar today. How are you doing, and what do you do for Meridian IT?
Great. Thank you, Tom. And first of all, thank you for your support, and we embrace the Help Systems product, so always appreciate the partnership. Tom Harand with Meridian IT. We are a global provider of cloud and managed services. We've been supporting the IBM I since 1992. Our managed service practice started in the late 90s, and we've been supporting cloud since 2010. So we're proud of the fact that we were providing cloud solutions before it was officially called cloud. I also want to thank Dan and Joe for your partnership. Skytap and IBM, we embrace the partnership. Our foundation is in the private cloud, and we have 4 cloud sites in the US and 12 outside of the US. But with the emergence of public cloud solutions, we embrace them as an option. And I think we all know that no customers are alike. So it takes some consultation and understanding, and as we're going to talk about in the webinar today, thorough understanding to determine which solution is best. But again, thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you, Tom. And you bring up a great point right away. It takes a lot of partnerships, technology-wise, to bring this cloud opportunity or technology to you as customers. So this is today's agenda. I'll remind you that we're recording today's webinar. There will also be handouts from today, although we don't have an extensive list of handouts here. But anyways, we're going to talk about where we are today with cloud technology, why move to the cloud, what are my options, how do I move to the cloud, what it's like in the cloud, and of course Q&A if you have questions today. Today's webinar is going to take us right around 55 minutes or so. That's what I expect to be anyways. So let's get started. First of all, just to remind you, we do the IBM I Marketplace survey at Help Systems. Matter of fact, we'll be presenting the 2020 survey results on January 17th. And we got a great crowd lined up for that event. But as we look back at this about a year ago, the results that we're showing you today, we talked and asked customers about what their top concerns were in planning their IT environment. And number one was security, of course. Then two, high availability, modernizing applications. But then highlighting a couple was IBM I skills and then migration of applications to the cloud. When I think about your CIOs and CEOs that are running your organizations, they're kind of number one and number two thing is security and what can I put in the cloud. And there's always been this struggle, can IBM I actually run in the cloud and work in the cloud? And today we're here to tell you that yes, it can. And we know that this is on the minds of your teams, and part of that story is modernizing your environments, and going to the cloud is certainly one of those things, and also augmenting your IBM I skills. There's no doubt a shortage of skills, but it's, as I tell people, it's not just an IBM I skills issue. It seems like it is, but it's actually an IT skills issue, and it impacts all platforms, all operating systems, but certainly heightened on IBM I as there is an aging workforce. Now, as we talk and go further into the IBM I Marketplace survey, we did ask you also how many of you are considering outsourcing or already outsourced, and we see about 70% saying no, they aren't considering being outs or using outsourced services, but 14% of you were last year when you took the survey. Others are looking at managed service providers. Some are co-located. Of course, I see more and more of that where people realize, hey, we don't have a proper data center at our manufacturing site or our distribution center. We really should look to have our systems co-located. And there are people that are also moving back. So there is that little bit going on too, where people have been outsourced and now they're coming back and running their own systems. And there's reasons for that too. So we appreciated you filling out that outsourcing question. And then, where does your IBM I infrastructure reside? Is it on-premise, which is a good portion of today's IBM I climate? 83% of you were there. Cloud only, 6%, and then 11% are kind of using both cloud and on-premise. And I think that that's kind of really where we are, and we're going to see a lot of that in 2020, a mixture of hybrid, where we're still having some of our servers or some of our partitions on-premise and some in the cloud. But this mix will change over time, and I think after hearing today's story from our experts, you'll understand why. The other thing to think about is using cloud technology not only for hosting your business applications, but it's also a source of doing cloud backups and helping in with your disaster recovery planning. We have customers we know that use HA in the cloud and of course backups in the cloud, and some people are using virtual tape libraries technically in the cloud as they move data from one VTL in one data center to another VTL that maybe is being hosted in a public cloud or a private cloud type setting, as Tom Horan talked about. And I know I've been doing a lot of talking. Any comments thus far from any of our panelists?
Not at this time, Tom.
Okay. I would just add, Tom, I think to your point, I think one of the survey results was interesting where, you've got a lot of folks running things on-prem in their, of course, in their data centers, and then folks kind of looking at this hybrid model. And that's just something I would echo that I'm seeing from across the globe as well. I think, regardless of market segment, whether you're retail, finance, healthcare, government, et cetera. That's really what we're seeing is people looking how to embrace that hybrid model and looking for the right technologies to help them get there. So yeah, no, I think this is going to be a great discussion.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we're off to our first polling question. Where does your IBM I infrastructure reside today? Is it on-premise? Is it co-located? Is it private? Is it public cloud? Or is it a hybrid type situation? So we'll let you answer this poll. We'll give you another 30 seconds or so while you do this. I'll talk about the fact that Help Systems, I mentioned in our start today that we've done hundreds of webinars today, and not all on IBM I. So keep in mind that we do a little over 50% of our business is non-IBM I type things, and robotic process automation and cybersecurity and pen testing for the enterprise. We do a lot more than just IBM I. So, and I know that most of us, one of the challenges as we talk about cloud is, okay, if I move my IBM I server into the cloud, what about my other servers? And that'll be an interesting thing too for our panelists to talk about today. So let's see where we're at here. Let's close this poll and look at our results. And looks like we have 70% of you are on-premise only, which I would expect that. Private cloud 10%, public cloud 5%, 5% of you doing hybrid, and then 10% of you doing co-location. So we allowed you to select multiples. So that was good to see those results. And let's move on into our agenda here and talk about why move to the cloud. And our first guest today is Mr. Dan Jones, fresh back from Europe and willing to get up with us quite early today in Seattle, Washington. So we appreciate your the willingness to work with us today. So let's have you talk about your comments on why I would move IBM I to the cloud.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Very happy to be here. Well, there are numerous reasons why companies are interested in moving IBM I workloads to the cloud. And it's not all about speeds and feeds. Really, first and foremost, it is what is the business reason or the business case for doing that. And in here, what we tend to see are a number of drivers, and it may not be just one driver, but data center exits. There is in certain industries or companies that desire to get out of the data center, that their business may be manufacturing or retail, it's not the data center business. And so that push of other workloads getting out of the data center, and pretty much IBM I is relegated to the corner, and it's the remaining workload sitting in that data center. Now there are options for getting that out. Second is business continuity, and we've really seen this one rising over the last, I'd say, 12 months or so, where being able to have I'll call it a warm standby in the cloud to fail over to, so do real-time replication into the cloud, but provide that continuity should you lose your data center or lose connectivity from the data center, failing over to the cloud and having a very low RPO, RTO to accommodate that. And then one of the last ones we see is hardware refresh. So we know Power 7 is no longer in support. Power 9 is here. We see quite a few customers who are going through the decision of it's time to refresh our servers. What are our options? Do we refresh that on-prem? Do we go to the cloud? Do we do a combination of that? But focusing on those business drivers first and foremost, rather than speeds and feeds, is very critical to the decision-making process. The next, we start to get into some of the development considerations. So modernization, this isn't to be confused with rewriting or replatforming the application. This is about building a new front end, extending the application capabilities with cloud native services such as analytics. And in this scenario, what we're tending to see is the system of record remains in IBM I. So that's the core transactional system. But the data is being offloaded into a data lake or a data warehouse for analytical or reporting purposes. Another example, again, keeping the system of record in IBM I, but adding a new front end. It might be a new mobile front end, a browser front end, but that's written or architected in a modern way. Having the low latency connectivity with the IBM I workload running in the cloud, and then the mobile services or the browser services or the analytical services running in the cloud is key. And then last is, let's keep production on premises, but let's look to the cloud for development. So apps running on IBM I are still very much in active development, and the cloud offers interesting benefits for being able to adopt agile or DevOps type practices. For example, rapid provisioning of environments. I know when I was in IT, we never had enough environments, and we were always struggling with environment contention, and our limitation was hardware. Well, if we could extend our development into the cloud and be able to provision new environments on demand, that allows developers to remain active and focused on their activities. And maybe it's also for maybe not just the developers, but doing functional testing or user acceptance testing and having environments that can be provisioned and updated rapidly for those types of scenarios. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on cost, because costs come up all the time. This isn't just pour money at something. In some cases, it may be cheaper to run in the cloud. For example, in those development scenarios, you don't need to go buy servers and have that capital expense up front for development environments. These environments typically are not always running, so being in the cloud and following a pay-by-the-hour model really makes sense here and can save you a lot of money. However, there are scenarios where it may be the same or marginally more expensive to run on the cloud than on premises. And what we encourage is every company has a slightly different set of economics that they're working with, and it's not fair to just take a look at, well, what does a S922 or 924 cost versus what does it cost for me to run in the cloud? But you have to look at the full set of costs when doing the comparison. So look at data center space, look at what it costs to have people on-prem managing, doing administrative activities on these physical servers. Those costs need to be factored into the equation so you can do that fair comparison. And one thing on people costs, it's not that you can just eliminate those people, but you might be able to redeploy them to other assignments. So take your admins, put them on some other type of valuable activities. Or if it comes to it, you could reduce your workforce. And I know people don't like to hear that, but we are in a very competitive environment, and businesses do need to look at the bottom line. So Joe, Tom, any additional comments there?
Who wants to go first? How about Tom Horan? Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, Dan, I think you really hit it on the head. I'll add that we've had a couple of situations that I think might be surprising, and that is customers that have older OS running and they want to move to the cloud. So we had one client, a large packaging company, that made the declaration that they were moving to a new ERP system, and the legacy system was supported by IBM I, and the IT department was then instantly focused on the new ERP and getting that migration in place, but it was taking longer than expected. So they took that old OS, it actually was running 5.3, and they moved it to the cloud. And then in a similar situation, we had a manufacturer that had their iSeries sitting in a closet in their warehouse. And it was the same situation where, the machine can just run and it works, but they said this isn't right, it's supporting a business here. So they moved, again, an older OS to the cloud. So yes, modern OS upgrades and so forth, very attractive for the cloud, but also sometimes the older OS can find that the best spot might be in the cloud.
And so, Tom, does your group then help that customer keep the OS current? Do you do that? Do you do the upgrades for them?
We do, absolutely. Okay. And we handle 5.3 and above.
Okay, got it. How about you, Joe? Any additional comments on this one?
I was just going to echo, Dan brought up a really good point, especially around, that second bullet around modernization and have it, make sure that folks really understand that doesn't mean at all replatforming. In fact, to Dan's earlier point, one of the biggest assets of now being able to have a bunch of different options in which you can put IBM I into the cloud. You keep those core systems, and then you can start surrounding them with new microservices technology, and it's really a really good marriage of the existing systems that are proven, time tested, they're running solid, and then as a really good way to tap into, as Dan said, analytics, or even new things like AI and whatnot, and taking advantage of some of these other technologies, and then welding them together to create new innovations. We're seeing that come up time and time again. So yeah, just I think a really good set of things for people to think about as they're kind of considering what the cloud and technology apertures that could open for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. That I really kind of glommed onto that one too. That whole modernization story around, we heard a lot about big data and all those things a few years ago, but the data hasn't gone away. Matter of fact, it keeps growing, right? So being able to get the system of record data closer to the AI solution or machine learning type things that we all are going to be faced with over the next decade is part of this activity.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, great comments, and I like that last bullet. It's not the cost savings because it actually may cost you more, but at the end of the day, your staff's more productive, your company's more modern, your customers love your applications because you've modernized them as you've done this. That's it's a win for your company. All right, let's move on to our next topic. What are my options? And we're going to turn over to Joe to talk about some options for running in the cloud and all these different terms that we hear as we talk about cloud technology. Over to you, Joe.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tom. So I think, as you can see here, there's a lot of different, topics and concepts here. And when we talk about, really mobilizing and enabling the IBM I community around cloud, there's a number of facets. And some of these are going to be not only just the public cloud, but how can you even make your on-prem data centers more cloud-like as well? So for example, when you start talking about things in the infrastructure as a service layer, we've been hard at work on the IBM side and engaging with partners, many of whom are here on this call, of course, but really trying to make sure that we enable the whole ecosystem for both on-premise setting up, getting a true and proper IaaS or infrastructure as a service layer, all the way up through platform as a service and having that full selection of public cloud technologies as well. For example, in the IaaS space, probably back in late 2012, early 2013, we launched a product at IBM called Power VC, and that's a really great option where people can actually start, getting some of those, capabilities to, quickly roll out IBM I partitions and get operational benefits and whatnot. So that starts to give people a way to sort of transform what they're doing on-prem through their, classically through their HMCs, and then start getting this other infrastructure management capabilities within your own data center. And a lot of these things, as we're talking through these bullets, it's really, I like to sort of call this a journey to cloud. How can you look at what you're doing in your data center to be more quote unquote cloud-like, and then how can you carry that all the way into, partnering with a cloud provider, MSP, CSP of your choice. As you shift gears and you sort of think about platform as a service, platform as a service is really conceptually, think of the experience we all have with our mobile devices today. Whether you're an Android user or an Apple user or what have you, you have this experience where you can go to your application store and you're presented with a number of choices, and you can click install, and you go grab a coffee and you come back and you can fire up LinkedIn or Facebook or what have you, or ESPN if you're a sports person. We want to have that same experience for our enterprise applications as well. And of course, that encompasses IBM I and all of the great applications that run on top of it. So you really want to be able to enable that simple one-click provisioning, even for line of business users to come in, or QA engineers to start standing up workloads. And that's where, again, things like Power VC can sort of start to help enable that. Heck, there's even other options where technologies like Openshift and coming in with containers and Kubernetes. And there's actually some very interesting ways that we can start to marry some of those concepts with the IBM I platform. In fact, Many of you on the call probably know Chris Whitney and are maybe familiar with the big LUG, large user group conference that happens at certain points throughout the year. We've done some
Yes.
very interesting demos where we've actually shown provisioning, integrating LPAR deployments of IBM I and then stitching that together with new containers in that modernization theme we were talking about earlier. So you could do some really cool things to start to build this PaaS experience, and you could do that within your own data center. And in fact, you can even start to do that same thing in the public cloud as well. So that gives you that true hybrid definition.
So Joe, just to jump in, this is an IBM I community, so they might not know what Openshift is and Kubernetes is. So do you mind sharing what that is?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So for those that maybe haven't heard, to Tom's point about Openshift or Kubernetes, at a very high level, Kubernetes is a container orchestration platform. So, containers is something as it's a new way of sort of delivering software that's really taken over in the industry, and it's quite an exciting technology where you're sort of, instead of virtualizing the hardware like traditional virtualization does, it's sort of like you're virtualizing the operating system. And of course, when you start to try to manage all of these containers, there could be tens or thousands or potentially even millions of these in a large enterprise. Kubernetes is the open source technology that is actually used to do container orchestration and sort of bring some sense of control and management to that otherwise chaotic mess you would have in the absence of that. And it was originally started by Google. Google used it internally and to manage their infrastructure. And then they said, oh, well, gee, maybe the whole community could benefit from this. And so several years back, they open sourced it, and now there's been huge community focus on it. So you've got IBM, VMware, Red Hat. I mean, all of the big companies are sort of fully behind Kubernetes as sort of the de facto standard way to manage containers. And Tom, that's in fact actually the base technology of Red Hat Openshift, which is a commercialized form that packages Kubernetes and some other things, to bring that to the enterprise for a fully supported enterprise version of that software.
Awesome. Thanks for defining those to the community. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. So a couple other things I thought I would touch on here real quick is, so then when we start talking about, the whole private cloud experience, when I think about this, it's sort of interesting. I think the term cloud has obviously has really, gone through a couple of different transformations. I think, 10 years ago when we first started kind of talking about cloud, people referred to it as a place. I've got to move my stuff somewhere. And you fast forward to today, and certainly there is public cloud where, and that is a place. But people could also, they started to realize, well, gee, cloud is really maybe about a set of capabilities. How can I get that simple one-click provisioning? How can I start bringing technologies or DevOps processes into what I'm doing and use things like Ansible to simplify infrastructure automation, or maybe HashiCorp Terraform to do infrastructure as code? And what's really cool about what I think the advances that we as a whole, Power System and IBM I community, what we've been able to do collectively is enable those sort of technologies for our platforms. So, again, you can start building a private cloud experience, and that's where, again, I touched on Power VC as one of the foundational technologies. But yeah, you can start using things like Ansible to automate infrastructure provisioning, even on your IBM I platform. Technologies like Terraform, again, really popular in the DevOps communities. You can use that technology to start automating infrastructure provisioning as well. The other thing I wanted to touch on here too, that we see often for, pretty much all of our Power clients, there's somewhere in their data center too, they've got a heterogeneous system. So there's x86 usually somewhere out there as well. And one of the really cool things that we try to do from a Power ecosystem standpoint, which of course, IBM I is a predominant member of that. We see a lot of clients that have focused on, they're looking at VMware technologies as a way to orchestrate things. And so IBM and VMware have partnered together, and this goes back to even 2016, where people can start using technologies like VMware vRealize automation as a way to not only provision resources through x86 with VMware technologies, but also do the same thing with IBM I, which is really quite exciting because again, so if you're an enterprise that has selected VMware, you could bring those same sort of deployment conveniences to your IBM I platform as well. And I think that's really a testament to our whole ecosystem here. We're really trying to make sure that our power systems platforms can collectively fit into as many different technology choices as you, our our valued end customers, whatever you've decided on for your strategy, we want you to be able to leverage those technologies in the way that you best see fit.
Awesome. So Dan Jones, I bet you can maybe comment on some of the unique things that are going on at Skytap to kind of help out with these different choices people may have in when they think about cloud. What are some things that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is it's not a one solution for everything. That kind of figuring out what is your workload, what's your business case, what do you need out of the offering, and determining which is the best fit for you. Now that can seem daunting and overwhelming, but that's really key. And it's not to just jump on the proverbial bandwagon that everything has to go to the cloud, or taking the alternative stance that no, nothing goes to the cloud, everything must remain on-prem. There are different types of workloads, and each solution sort of fits better or worse for those workloads. The other comment I'd make here is around what I'll call hosters. So some of these have positioned themselves as cloud. So you'll go to their website, you'll read their marketing material, and they'll say, hey, we're a cloud for IBM I. And I just want to warn people to be careful on that and to ask lots of questions. First off, how are they defining cloud, and how does that match with how you're defining cloud? Do they offer capacity on demand so that from a non-production standpoint, you can spin up and spin down LPARs as needed, and that you're not paying for those LPARs when you're not running them? Do they offer billing down to the second? Or are you just in it for the long haul, and you've signed a long-term contract and you're paying for resources that you're not even leveraging or using? Do they offer pay-as-you-go, or do you have to sign a long contract? And do they have APIs to be able to automate provisioning and control? Both I mentioned it and Joe mentioned it around DevOps and Agile, and it's really key to be able to automate those pipelines. And if they're not offering an API to automate provisioning and deployment, well, so much for a true DevOps pipeline.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Tom, any comments on this one?
No, actually, I don't. I think Joe and Dan hit it, other than to build upon what Joe had said around investigating your options and determining what's best for you and by workload. You really have to do that review.
Right, and there's a lot of options is really what it amounts to. Is you have the traditional MSPs that you guys play a role in to, public cloud.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think the overall theme here, and obviously then you start to touch on the public cloud options as well. And there's a lot of options out there, to Dan's point and Tom's, in that, there's the flexibility and choice. And I think to me, the thing that's been really exciting, especially from an kind of an overall IBM standpoint, is that this is really providing a really solid ecosystem of choice. And so I think, as probably you've heard from everybody on the call so far, there's a lot of options here. And I think the thing that I want to make sure that all of us, on the webinar here today understand is that regardless of what you want to do with your cloud strategy, whether it's developing an on-prem private cloud experience, or you want to start looking at applications and data to start leveraging public cloud, or starting to build that hybrid cloud experience where you can sort of deploy what you want, where you want, when you want, our whole IBM I community has the technology choices there. And it's companies like Skytap and IBM and Meridian IT and Help Systems and so on and so forth that can actually help, probably lay out some options there on what that journey or roadmap might look like. So I think it's in a really exciting time here for the whole community.
Thank you, Joe. All right, well, let's go off to our second polling question. Let me open that up here. And what are your biggest concerns about moving your IBM I to the cloud? You have migrating the data, the cost, security, job loss, availability and access of the system itself and the data that's that's on it. You know, one of the things that I often hear is people are always concerned. We're very protective of this IBM I community, and we don't want to lose it, right? And the fear of going to the cloud is just one more step of losing the platform. I often hear that, but I think that's so far from the truth in that the fact that the IBM I or IBM Power technology can be hosted in the cloud at Skytap, Meridian, IBM themselves. You hear Google and Azure and all these other cloud offerings out there. Just means more people are consuming the Power hardware, the Power technology, which means long live the platform in my mind. And so really is actually good for the platform to have these options and the growth and the technology around that. All right, so let's see how are we doing on this polling question. We gave you a little over a minute. I'm going to close it out, and well, there you go. Top two, availability, high availability or availability and access is certainly a concern. I don't want to lose that for my company. The thing with IBM I, people are just used to it being there. It's always available. I used to always tell the story of going to a conference and people say, yeah, we got one of those AS400s. It just sits in the corner of the data center and just runs itself, right? And that's kind of the way we've grown up with this platform. And then security, obviously security is on everybody's mind. The concerns for security when you go to the cloud, and we haven't really talked about this, but that could be a fun thing when we get to Tom Horan's section, is talk a little bit about security. Do people have to not worry about security once they go into the cloud? We'll leave it open. You don't need to answer that right now. And then of course, cost being the next one. All right, well, thank you for answering that polling question. I guess I didn't share the results out to you guys, so now you guys can see the results there. 77%, 68%, 50, 27, and 14. All right, let's move on to the next section. And how do I move to the cloud? And well, yours truly will talk about that, but certainly our team here will help out here as we go through this one. So really, why IBM I can fit in the cloud. And if you think about it, Joe just talked a bit about that. You can put IBM I up alongside of all these other technologies and offer up some additional modernization with that. But if you think about the platform itself, it's been very good at being a multi-user platform in itself, in that you can run many applications and processes on the same server. So as you host these VMs or partitions in the cloud, that doesn't go away. The fundamental IBM I operating system, workload capabilities, work management, all those things still exist in each and every instance of a VM running in the cloud. And then if you think about the server as a database server, your database is with you. It's just a matter of how do I get those workloads into the cloud. So then as we look at this, we have to think about, well, where do I want to start? Do I want to start with my production and run my production workload out there? Or do I want to just kind of dip my toes in it and say, we're going to use the cloud for augmenting our development? And Dan talked about putting up development partitions so that we can augment the special projects that we have going on. Now I have the option of loading up or spinning up an IBM I partition for a month, for a week. We at Help Systems kind of think about the IBM I workload and think that most customers aren't really going to be looking at hourly or second level or seconds of usage time, because it does take a time to spin up an IBM I environment and then probably configure your applications and things you're gonna run up there. So even from a development standpoint, I'm looking at weeks or month kind of projects. With production, obviously you're looking at longer term contracts probably and running things there. But then also turn our attention to disaster recovery. We're seeing more and more customers that in the HA world or in the backup world where they're backing up systems, they don't have that good second data center where they need to host their additional server for doing HA or DR type planning. And so putting your VM in the cloud that's going to host your HA is a step into this cloud activity in the IBM I world. So some things that you have to think about though is, and I just had this discussion with some of the Skytap team this week, is sizing your footprint in the cloud. And what do I mean by that? Well, you have, especially if you're looking at a production server, right? You have this workload going on today and you're consuming CPW, you're consuming processors, disk space. You kind of got to have a feel for what you're doing today in order to make sure that when you go to the cloud, you have the proper environment for you. And one of the things that Help Systems has been doing for years now through our acquisition of MPG and the Performance Navigator product is helping people size their workload. And there's no reason we can't use Performance Navigator on premise, take that on premise data, see what you're consuming today, and make sure that we right size that as you move into the cloud. And we can do that for IBM I. Of course, we've been doing that for years. We can also do it for AIX, and we can also do it for Linux, and we can even do it for the GPU boxes. So maybe you're looking at a competitive situation. You want to go to the cloud, and you kind of don't really care where you run it, but you realize that you can gobble up a lot of on-premise x86 boxes running on one power server hosting your Linux environment or AIX or IBM I. And of course, how do I get my data there? How do I move my data to the cloud? You know, can I use a traditional tape and restore? Or am I really looking at migrating, you know, across some form of communications? And, you know, with that, of course, we have the Robot HA, Power HA offerings that can help with data migration. Robot HA is going to be using that local and remote journaling technology that's built into operating system to help you migrate and keep your data current. So if you're looking at a production environment, I might want to kind of stage this and plan it out. I'll spin up my partition, my VM in the cloud, and then use a tool like Robot HA to keep my data in sync from on-premise to the cloud. And then when I'm ready to switch over and do what we call in industry a roll swap, I can now roll swap over to that VM, and that's where my production is running in the cloud. And then maybe I end up transitioning the other now new target, which is back on-prem, into the cloud too. And now I end up with both my production and my DR VMs running in the cloud. So that's how we envision you transitioning your footprint, because in the IBM I world, we're not talking 20 gigabytes, 200 gigabytes. We're often talking, minimum 1 terabytes of data that I'm moving, or 5 terabytes of data that I want to move to the cloud. So the challenge becomes, how do I get all that data there in a reasonable amount of time? And if I'm not ready to switch over yet, because I got other things that I got to put in place for my production environment, how can I keep those in sync and in concert as we have this time period where we're kind of straddling the fence between on-premise and in the cloud? So a tool like Robot HA can help keep that data in sync for you for that data migration. Enough talking from me. Anybody else want to kind of comment on how do I move my IBM I into the cloud?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Tom. So
Thanks, Dan.
workload sizing, absolutely. And I think taking a look at Performance Navigator is a really good path, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a like for like. And we encounter a number of shops that they don't actually know what their true requirements are. They just know this is how we have it configured and it runs. But is that truly what they need in terms of, memory or cores assigned to it? But two other topics that come up a lot are, one, how do I move large volumes of data? And two, how does licensing work? So I'm going to hold off on licensing because I know what Tom Horan is going to talk about. So I'll save my comments for licensing then. But for large volumes of data, it's mostly a physics problem. So
It is.
we're adding support for IBM Clouds and Microsoft Azure's native solutions for moving large volumes of data. So that's MDM, or massive data movement, from IBM, and Azure Data Box, respectively. Those are good solutions for getting the initial data up there. So if you have multi-terabytes of data that you need to move, that's a good way to get that data up there, and then leverage solutions like Robot HA and Power HA to bring them up to the same point in time as your on-premises, and then do the cutover.
Yeah. You know what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to move on and talk about and get to Tom and what it's like in the cloud. Tom, I love the phrase, what's it like in the cloud?
Well, thanks, Tom. I appreciate the intro. First of all, the overriding theme is to make no assumptions. And let's start with data backup and DR considerations, and specifically the data backup. So you may have looked at HA in the past because the business said, you know what, we'd like to have HA, and then possibly the price of buying both a source system and a target system put the decision out of line. Well, cloud actually gives you an option that makes HA more attractive now. So what you can do is you can take your target system and you can replicate data using robot HA to your, start with your source system, use robot HA and replicate data to that target system. And that target system can sit in IBM's public cloud. It can sit in Meridian's private cloud. And if you think about it, what you're doing then is you're just consuming the resources that enable the replication. So you don't have to buy the entire target system any longer. You can utilize the cloud, pay for what you need, and again, you're enabling the replication. And then if you do need to declare a disaster and light up that target system in a DR scenario, you can then increase the resources as necessary. And to increase those resources, you can leverage technology such as Skytap to enable the relaunch of that workload. So when I say make no assumptions, what we've done in the past and how we've looked and consumed technology in the past, really you can take a fresh look. So just to revisit that solution is, you have a source system replicating data to a target system. Let's say it's sitting in IBM's cloud, and you need to declare a disaster because your production system is experiencing an issue. Well, using Skytap, you can then launch that workload up into IBM's cloud and be up and running. So, what you've done is you've increased your availability. You've also managed your cost properly. And then you can ensure the other thing that was mentioned of importance, of course, is security. You can ensure that everything is secure across the entire solution. So going back, make no assumptions. Data backup. If you're working with a cloud provider, don't assume that they're backing up your data. You have to ask them, are they backing it up once a day? Are they using HA? Yep. Are they archiving the data? How many copies of the data are there? So again, I think about Gmail. A lot of us use Gmail or Yahoo Mail, and we just assume that they're backing up my emails, right? Well, these platforms and these services are supporting your business. Don't make any assumptions. And then when it comes to disaster recovery, you have to ask that question also. Okay, if I'm running production in your cloud, what are we doing to protect us in a DR situation? If that primary system has some type of issue, what is in place for DR? And do I need to be part of that solution? And do we need to be part of the testing? So obviously testing is important, and you have to confirm to the cloud provider, are you testing? Are we testing? Are we both testing? How is that working? The next two, I'll put together staffing and management. When it comes to staffing, often we, of course, IBM I has been around for some time, so we do have some expertise leaving the market, right? People are retiring or changing direction or focusing on other areas. That's happening. But the other thing that's happening around staffing is that IT departments are saying, hey, let's leverage the expertise of outsiders. Let's leverage the expertise of people that focus on this 24/7, 365 days a year. So the staffing question isn't just about, let's supplement a gap, but it's more, okay, let's do what's important to our business and focus on our business, building on what Dan has mentioned previously, and leverage the folks that can help us. Now, it's really, really important whenever you're moving to a cloud integrated solution is to have some type of responsibility matrix. And that is basically a breakdown of who is doing what, who's monitoring, who's managing, who's handling job scheduling, change management, configuration changes, problem management when a problem does arise, because it will arise. How is that going to be handled? Who's tracking the tickets? Managing the backups, providing a project manager for the onboarding, for the disaster recovery. So the responsibility matrix goes along with the staffing and the management and monitoring considerations. Again, don't make any assumptions. Documentation, using a responsibility matrix is one way to do that. Licensing considerations. Obviously, over time now that cloud has been, I would say, is moving from infancy into full adoption in the market. The software providers have aligned their licensing with the cloud. So in the old days, sometimes we're trying to fit some licensing into the cloud model that just wasn't right, but now that's not the case. So usually the cloud provider for IBM I will provide the operating system, the performance tools, maybe the things such as the usual suite of the WebSphere Development Studios and DB2 Query and System I Access and things like that. But you really have to understand what your cloud provider is providing in regards to license and what you're responsible for. ERP normally falls on the end customer. So if you're running an ERP, you need to check with your ERP provider to see what impact moving to the cloud will have on licensing. And of course, Tom at Help Systems can help you with any licensing regarding any of their products within IBM I and outside of I. I know this webinar today is focused on IBM I, but what I'm presenting regarding licensing also impacts outside of I. Security and compliance. So we deal with a very wide range of customers. We have some customers that security is very thorough. For instance, we have a customer that works with the defense industry. And then we also work with small manufacturers, or I'll as an example, a manufacturer of candy. Well, we see very different levels of requirements coming from customers around security. And I think it's important, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, your system I is most likely supporting the business and is most likely mission critical to some segment, if not all of your business. And because of that, security has to be taken very, very as a high priority with everyone. So, SOC certifications, ISO certifications, do they follow ITIL best practices? Management of the data. Is the data moving outside of the U.S.? If the data is moving outside of the U.S., then how does GDPR come into play? How is threat and vulnerability management handled? Physical security, who has access to these systems? Who's touching these systems? How is everything tracked? So IBM I, often there's some legacy systems out there. And when you're looking at the cloud, it's almost you have to go back to the future in a sense, where you have to say, okay, that you've been handling security well, and you can't make any assumptions that the cloud provider is also handling security well. You have to ask the questions. The last one, connectivity. Well, I think we've been blessed that IBM I handles data over a network very, very well. The connectivity requirements need to be fleshed out at the beginning, and then during the onboarding and during the testing or / proof of concept. But generally, the connectivity requirements are lower than expected. Now, whenever you set up your connectivity, you should always have the ability to spike. So if someone's offering 10 megs, for instance, and you have if you have an end of month job, or if you have a peak during the holiday season for some reason, or you always have to have the ability to spike, and you need to understand the billing around connectivity, because this is one of those areas that could be a gotcha, where, it was an unexpected charge. So always get in front of connectivity, but in general, the connectivity for requirements for IBM I are lighter than what you would think. Tom?
Well, thank you, Tom. That's great. Dan or Joel, any comments on this one?
Joe, go ahead if you do.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. I think Tom Horan hit on a lot of the key pieces here. There's a lot of things to consider. All of the different compliances, security policies. There's a lot of things to think about as you make that move. And there's choice. And I think that's where, kind of reiterating what I said earlier, there's, this really is a journey. And, I think to that end, that's where I think having a really good, trusted partner to kind of help on this journey is so important. And obviously, several enterprises here on the call today to help that, and others as well. So, again, really good points, Tom.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, this is Tom Huntington, the point of, some things don't go away. You're still ultimately responsible for backups, HA, security, monitoring possibly. Some providers will provide the monitoring, but if you're truly going into a public cloud, you're really looking at more of an platform as a service where you're still responsible for a lot, and you really need to understand what you're getting into from that responsibility standpoint. Wouldn't you agree with that, Tom?
I would. That's a great point, Tom. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So let's move on to our last polling question before we get into Q&A here. How can we help you? Pretty straightforward poll. Let me open that up and launch it so that you can choose off some. We give you an opportunity here today for several things that we can help you out with. One of the things that it's a very common practice here at Help Systems is to get together with our customers one-on-one through the web or on site and do what we call a technology update. We love doing those. It's a great session that we have with our customers. Both you can learn a lot about what's going on at Help Systems. Maybe you want to connect up with myself and talk about HA. I do a lot of those talks, not just on Robot HA. I talk Power HA and other things that you should be thinking about. Maybe you want to connect up with Dan Jones from Skytap. You want to connect up with Tom Horan from Meridian IT, or connect up with Joe or Cropper from IBM. We're all willing to work with you and help enlighten you more on this topic. There's a lot going on. We've seen a lot in different publications like IT Jungle and Common on the cloud topic for IBM I and all the different rumors and stuff. Well, it's no longer a rumor. It's here today, and there's a lot of things going on that can help you out in managing your IBM I server or considering it for the cloud. So we'll leave that polling question open for a little bit and just let's see here. All right, looks like we've had plenty of time now, so I'm going to close out that last polling question, and we will go right on into our last slide, a couple of slides here. Just to remind you, Help Systems from an IBM I perspective, we have this argument all the time, is everything cloud ready? Well, reality, I said it earlier, your work management, your backups, your monitoring, those things don't go away, and we can help you out with backup and HA, document management, cybersecurity, monitoring your VMs, business intelligence in the cloud, capacity planning to get you ready for the cloud, and then reporting on your activity as you consume cloud resources, and then automation. Automation shouldn't go away as we consider moving to the cloud. All right, so let's, while we got that slide up, we have any additional questions from our audience out there? It looks like we got one here. What should I look for in the contract with my cloud provider? Terms and conditions, that sounds like a pretty pointed question. Are there any things to consider there?
Hey, Tom, it's Tom Horan.
Yeah.
I work closely with our legal regarding contracts, and a couple things come to mind. First of all, it's technology, but it's still a people business, I believe. So before you get to the contract, make sure you like the people. But when it comes to the contract, some of the things that are, I'll call them redlined, that are highlighted often and clarified. The first one is to make sure around the renewal that the time, first of all, understand the renewal. What's the term, and then how much time or notice you have to give in advance, whether you're going to renew or not. And that leads to another point, and that is, if you're not going to renew, then you have to make sure that it's in the contract. What's the exit strategy? Will the cloud provider provide the data to you? Will they declare that your data has been destroyed? If you need a transition period, that's something that customers have requested to say, hey, if we have 30 days to cancel, we still want to be able to have 90 days to transition to another solution. So, often people are focused on the upfront and the solution, but, think about the exit strategy at the same time. And then the other piece that comes up a lot is around the SLA, and I think we have to recognize that there's two types of SLAs. There's the uptime SLA, and then there's also the customer support or the response SLA. So, make sure that the SLA, meets your business requirements. Is the uptime, meet, and then also the response time for the customer support. Those are the 2 or 3 key items that come to my mind. Anyone else?
Awesome. Well, you know what, Tom, at this point, we're right at the top of the hour. So I'm going to say, you guys, great job. Thank you for sharing your expertise from IBM, Skytap, and Meridian IT. And I know there's a lot of other options out there, but we can only fit so many people on one webinar. And I wish really, happy holidays to all of you. This is my last webinar of the year. Next year, we start out with the IBM I Marketplace study, and then we also have Performance Navigator webinar coming out on January 29th. I want to thank all of you. Have a great holiday. Enjoy your families. Thank you for joining us today.